Is this thing on?
Hi again, my name is Megan and I blog at welcome to the zoo.ca. We're continuing our YouTube series answering home daycare questions from providers just like you. Today's question is from Anna, who lives in Sudbury, Ontario. She hasn't opened a home daycare yet, but she's wondering if it's financially worth it for her to do that. She's single, she doesn't have children of her own. It may in fact be worth it for her to do that. But here's the thing. Now in Ontario, we've had recently new legislation come in that governs the number of children that you can have in your care as an unlicensed home daycare provider. Now, most of the home daycares in Ontario are unlicensed, from what I understand, and that's perfectly legal as long as you follow the ratios laid out by the government. Now, in the past, the rule has been that unlicensed providers in Ontario could have 5 children in addition to their own kids. So they could have 5 home daycare children that they were watching at a time, and if they had 1 child of their own, 2 children of their own, 3, 4, 5 children of their own, whatever, they could care for them as well as 5 home daycare children. So now with the new legislation, the government has put in place ratios for unlicensed home daycares so that they aren't overtaxed and you're not caring for too many babies at once. Now, I've done 5 babies and 5 toddlers all at once, and yeah, it's a lot to handle. You get used to it. But now the government is kind of cracking down on that and putting in place some ratios that are much more similar to the way licensed and commercial daycares operate in Ontario. And so now that's caused a bit of an uproar among home daycare providers. And here's my take on it. Now, before I get any farther, if you'd like more information on what the specific ratios are, you can Google the Independent Coalition for Child Care Providers in Ontario, and or look up CICPO on Facebook. They've got a very active Facebook page, and their website also is full of some useful information. And they explain the ratios a little bit more in depth. I don't want to tell you what they are because I will get them confused. I don't even understand the ratios. I helped put together a video for KICPO and I still don't understand the ratios. It's confusing to me, and I know it's probably confusing to a lot of other home daycare providers. So this is what I saw happening before this new legislation. What I saw was that around me, most home daycare providers in my little town were unlicensed. I think we live in a town that has a population of just under 10,000. And there were lots and lots of home daycare providers, and I only knew of one home daycare that was actually licensed. As an unlicensed home daycare, however, I still wanted to be acting legally. I didn't want to have any reason for anybody to report me or say that I was doing or running a daycare in a way that I shouldn't be operating. I wanted to do everything legally. So that meant that I adhered to the legal ratio for back then, which was 5 kids in addition to my own, and I stuck with that. However, at the time, and I still know of this, many unlicensed home daycare providers weren't that concerned with what the government said, and they preferred to operate illegally, which means they would take as many kids as they could. Now, whether that was, as many as would fit in their space, or as many as they could personally handle, or as many parents as came to them. So I knew of and heard of home daycares that were operating at twice the capacity, 3 times the capacity is what they should be running at legally. So, obviously that causes problems when you're talking about, fire escape and all of that stuff. What happens if you need to get all those kids out at the same time in an emergency? It also puts the home daycare itself at risk for being reported and then having to pay the fines. Now, that's not to mention the lower standard of care that each of those children would be receiving. Now, we all know of the crazy stories that we hear in the news headlines where, home daycares have one daycare provider or 2 daycare providers, and they've got 30 kids and a child dies while in their care, and it's tragic and it's horrible. And one of the main reasons is because they're acting illegally. They just don't have the manpower, the adult power, to care for all of those children properly and properly supervise them. Okay, so that was then. Now, the government has brought in this new legislation, I would assume in an attempt to keep children from dying, keep those unfortunate situations from happening. And quite often, they do happen in unlicensed care. Now, there are a similar number of incidents that happen in licensed care, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about unlicensed care right now, like you and I running a home daycare out of our houses and not wanting to be licensed. So the new legislation determines the ratios. Now that means that as an unlicensed home daycare provider, if you are attempting to follow the law and stay as legal as you possibly can, you likely would have to let children go to cut back to get to those ratios that the government has laid out. And stories have come up, and people have shared their situations where they have had to let children go if they don't fit into the proper age brackets, or they've had to say no to parents when before they would have been able to take them, now with the new ratios they can't. So here's my beef with that. The daycares, the home daycares that were operating in an unlicensed, illegal way before, probably now couldn't care less about the new requirements. If they didn't care about the legalities before, there's no reason why they would switch now. There is no incentive at all. There's really no consequence. There is a fine, I believe, if they are reported and if they are investigated and found to be over ratio and over their limits. But if nobody reports them, then they're free and clear to continue operating illegally. So those daycare providers that are operating legally are having to end care for some of their kids so that they can cut back to maintain those ratios. So our legally operating unlicensed daycare providers are now making less money. They're letting families go, trying to keep within the bounds of the law. The unlicensed illegal providers now have this whole crop of families that are looking for care because they've just been booted out of the legal daycare. They're desperately looking for care somewhere else. So the illegal operators, I'm sure, are quite happy to say, hey, yeah, we've got space for one more, come on in. And of course, those parents, being quite happy to find somebody who can provide care for their child, are not going to be reporting them. They're not going to be telling anybody that this daycare is operating illegally. They're going to be happy for the care that they've got. By the same token, the legally operating daycares may be raising their rates to compensate for that lost income for having to cut back on the number of children. Illegal daycares can quite easily keep their rates the same and still be making more money. So I think, the Ontario government is trying to do a good thing. That's great. Their intentions are great. I don't think, practically speaking, that it's going to work out the way that they want. So in answer to Anna's question, whether it's worth it for her to open a daycare in Ontario right now, if she wants to operate legally, I would suggest that she very carefully works out the math and figures out, with her ratios, with the demand, with the going rate of daycare in her area, is it going to be worth it for her to open a home daycare? Now, if she chooses to operate illegally, I'm sure she'd have a ton of kids. She wouldn't have any problem making a living doing that, which is really sad. That's not the way it should be. That's not what the government intended. And I really hope that the government is able to take a look at this kind of situation that they've created, where it's more profitable to operate illegally and possibly put children in danger and operate over the limits, stretch your resources to the max, so that you can make more money and in fact just make a living. So that's my take on it. That's a bit of a rant, but I would really encourage you to look into it yourself if you're operating in Ontario as a home daycare provider. Because of my personality, I would want to make sure that I'm operating legally. But by the same token, it would no longer be worth it for me to run a home daycare at this point. So that's too bad. I'm sure there are a number of other home daycare providers in this very situation. And it's a sad state of affairs when we are really pushing parents towards making use of illegal, unlicensed home daycare. It's too bad. But anyway, that's my take. I would love to hear what your opinions on that are. What do you think? If you're a home daycare provider in Ontario, how has this affected you, this latest legislation? Have you had to let children go, and has it affected your bottom line? I would love to hear your take on it and your advice for other home daycare providers, whether it's worth it for them to open up their own home daycare brand new from start right now. So, and yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below or email me at megan@welcometothe.zoo.ca. All right, I will catch you next time. Hopefully next time won't be quite so much of a rant as this one. All right, catch you next time. Bye-bye.